afternoon. Today I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Sudan because of the imminent threat they presented to our national security. Our target was the network of radical groups affiliated with and funded by Osama bin Laden. There is convincing information from our intelligence community that the bin Laden terrorist network was responsible for these bombings. Based on this information, we have high confidence that these bombings were planned, financed, and carried out by the organization bin Laden leads. We work to build an international coalition against terror. But there have been and will be times when our very national security is challenged and when we must take extraordinary steps to protect the safety of our citizens. Earlier today, the United States carried out simultaneous strikes against terrorist facilities and infrastructure in Sudan. Our forces targeted one of the most active terrorist bases in the world. It contained key elements of the bin Laden network's infrastructure and has served as a training camp for literally thousands of terrorists from around the globe. Countries that persistently host terrorists have no right to be safe havens. Let our actions today send this message loud and clear. There are no expendable American targets. There will be no sanctuary for terrorists. We will defend our people, our interests, and our values. We will persist, and we will prevail. Thank you, God bless you, and may God bless our country.
I'm skeptical of another American war abroad in Africa. After the disaster in Mogadishu in '93, I think the United States ought to tread carefully in the region, and I remain unconvinced that a full-bore, all-guns-blazing shooting war is the way to go. I support our troops, but I deeply question the mission they've been given.
You can't support the troops but question the mission. That's un-American. Either you're with this nation in our fight against terrorism, or you're in bed with the enemy. It's as simple as that.
Excuse me? I'll have you know I fought for this country. I was there in Somalia. I know what the hell I'm talking about, and it would serve you well to shut up when more experienced people are talking. Un-American. Who do you think you are? I'm a colonel of the United States Army, and I fought for this country. You don't get to call me un-American.
And I'm grateful for your service, Colonel. It's just that
you aren't. You don't seem grateful for much of anything.
It's just that we
men and
really
women of our armed forces put their lives on the line when they put on that uniform, and you don't seem grateful for that at all.
This is a different war, Colonel. It's a different war with different objectives. This isn't Somalia.
No, it isn't Somalia. It's Sudan, whose civil war is all but certain to lead us into further trouble down the line. Do you know how difficult it is to navigate complex social alliances in a foreign land? No, of course you don't, because you never served a day in your life, and yet you're eager to send others to do it for you.
I appreciate the challenges involved, but this is a necessary intervention.
It's
for the sake of our national security, and you can't just sit there and say
Let's
it isn't.
Let's at least be honest and call it what it is. This isn't an intervention, it's an invasion, and it's a full-on war. We're going to war, and we're not even questioning whether such an immense act is the right way forward.
No, we're not questioning it because we were attacked. This is a defensive conflict that the United States did not start. Oh, but the United States will indeed finish.
Huh. Yeah, what are you gonna do, huh? You're just gonna sit here and cheerlead from behind a desk while you call for more to die in the name of freedom? And you have the nerve to call me un-American?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do have the nerve, because this is a clear battle between good and evil as we've ever had, and yet you still choose to question it as if you have some kind of moral high ground. You don't, Colonel. If you did, you wouldn't be here talking to me. You'd be in Egypt right now, getting ready to roll into Sudan.
That's what I'm saying about you. If you had a shred of integrity in your body, you would be the one over there. All I'm saying is that this region has cost us a lot of lives and resources already, and I want us as a nation to learn our lesson.
We're not the ones who need a lesson learned. Osama and his jihadist cowboys do. They need to learn that they can't hit us like that and expect us not to hit back even harder.
I'm not disputing that. But I'd also say you personally need to learn some forethought and common sense before you go calling for things that you can't take back. When those flag-draped caskets start coming back by the plane load, you better have a moment of reckoning.
Gentlemen, if I may cut this short, we do have new developments from southern Egypt, where American and coalition forces are massing for their push into Sudan. It's about 10 after 10 here in New York and in D.C. where President Clinton is, and about 10 minutes after 4 in the morning over there in Egypt. We'll go now to a recording from our correspondent Elliot Schwartz, who is at Aswan International Airport in Egypt, about 170 miles from the border with Sudan. Aswan International, while a civilian airport, has been used as a de facto military base in recent weeks, as coalition forces have massed thousands of troops, vehicles, and their equipment there in preparation for the conflict we are seeing unfold tonight. Listeners, be aware, we received this tape from Elliot Schwartz after a considerable delay, as the news media has been instructed to delay releasing certain information until after it no longer poses a threat to the mission. So this is from about an hour and a half ago, as we understand. This is our correspondent Elliot Schwartz, who is at Aswan Airport in Egypt. Here is that recording.
David, I'm here at the Aswan Coalition Air Base, as the guys here are calling it, less than 200 miles from the Sudanese border. There are fighter jets being launched right now in another wave of air attacks aimed at crippling Sudanese air defenses, commanders have told me. You can probably hear the planes in the background here. Every few moments there seems to be another jet taking off. But by the time you receive this recording, it's likely that these planes will have already hit their targets in Sudan and will be on their way back, probably by the time you're hearing this. And we don't know how long this bombing campaign is going to last in the skies over Sudan, but top commanders are saying that this is only the tip of the iceberg as the coalition begins its aerial campaign. Right behind me is the UH-1 Huey helicopter taking off, carrying apparently Special Forces operators to lead the spearhead of this invasion force. We don't know where they're going or what their target or mission is, but there are ground forces getting ready to move into Sudan as I speak. Meanwhile, with the regular forces, mechanized infantry units are performing their last-minute inspections on all of their vehicles and such, making sure they're ready to go. Soldiers are maintaining firearms, loading ammunition, and doing a myriad of other last-minute duties as final preparation for war. I've spoken with a lot of the guys here, and none of them wanted to join me on the air tonight, but they've all expressed in some form that this is what they've trained for, and that they are ready tonight to fulfill the mission which has been handed down to them. David, back to you.
As we know, President Clinton had offered Sudan a simple path to avoid this conflict. Hand over Osama bin Laden and direct us to all his known terrorist associates. Dictator of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, however, has apparently allowed this offer to expire without response, the deadline having come a little more than 4 hours ago at midnight Sudanese time. Now, it appears, as of about an hour and a half ago, as per a recording from Elliot Schwartz, that coalition aircraft are airborne and striking ground targets in Sudan in the first phase of military action against the country. In Sudan's capital, Khartoum, there are very few Western reporters still in the city, with only the most intrepid of veteran journalists still on the ground there. Our very own Suzanne Ray is one of them. We'll go to her now, live from the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. Suzanne, we understand coalition aircraft have stricken targets in the country. Are you seeing or hearing anything where you are in the capital?
Hi, David. I'm at the Plaza Hotel in Khartoum, only about a mile from the airport here. just mentioned are what I think we just heard a little while ago. About 45 minutes ago now, we heard some loud, sharp explosions fairly close by, and we saw some bright flashes of light coming from the area of the airport as well. There are some fires still ongoing. I can see smoke lit up by fire over there, but otherwise it's returned to a state of quiet for now. We're apparently in between waves of airstrikes. We expect more to come any minute now, but for the moment, things seem to be mostly quiet. The streets of Khartoum, usually a bustling city of more than 3 million people, are eerily empty tonight. Civilians have been advised to shelter in their homes. All military servicemen, police, and firefighters have been called up for duty. Sudan stands on hair-trigger alert right now as the nation endures this first wave of coalition air attacks. David?
Thanks for that update, Suzanne. The Republic of Sudan is a dictatorship led by Colonel Omar al-Bashir, who seized power in a military coup back in 1989. Now, it's likely that there have been military assets, such as air defense systems, combat aircraft, fuel, munitions, or any other number of things that could be utilized there for military purposes. That's probably what those strikes were targeted at, if I had to guess. Now, Suzanne, what's it like being so close to the heart of it, as you are right now?
That's the eerie thing about it, David, is that it doesn't feel like we're in the heart of it, or at least not yet. We here in the press are calling it the calm before the storm, because it's like how you can hear the distant thunder rumbles before a bad storm. That's kind of what it's like right now. We can hear it, we can feel it, to some degree, but we know that this is only the start of what is likely to be a very long night here in Sudan.
A very long night ahead, indeed. We'll be covering it all live here on Radio 660. I'm David Sheppard, and I'm here with Carol Stanley as we cover what the U.S. military is calling Operation Nile Garden, the coalition military action against the Republic of Sudan. Carol, what is the story of Operation Nile Garden?
Nile Garden was named such because of Sudan's position along the Nile River and the idea that the country needs to be maintained like a garden. Terrorist groups in the nation and the extremists in the government, it was explained to me, are like the weeds, and removing the weeds will allow the nation to flourish like a blooming garden. The origins of Operation Nile Garden came from intelligence the U.S. government had obtained over recent years as to the whereabouts of terrorist leader Osama bin Laden, information that became pertinent to act upon after the terrorist attacks that occurred in January in the Philippines, several Pacific airline flights, and against the buildings and infrastructure in the United States. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, convened an emergency discussion on January 21st, and the following day NATO decided that for the first time in history to invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter. An attack on one is an attack on all. It was then that the decision was made to form a multinational coalition against the terrorist group known as Al-Qaeda. NATO has worked strongly to build a global alliance against terrorism, with 13 nations committed to sending ground, air, or naval forces in support of military action in Sudan. The 13 nations in the coalition at this moment are the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, France, Spain, Germany, Italy, as well as Poland, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Australia, and New Zealand. Supporting the coalition in non-combat capacities, assistance is being led by local allies like Chad, Uganda, and Niger, as well as Turkey, Japan, Oman, and Qatar. Ground and air forces are said to be stationed along the Sudanese borders with Egypt, Chad, Uganda, and Niger, allowing the coalition to attack targets in Sudan from virtually any direction.
And what exactly is the target in this war? Are we at war with Al-Qaeda, or with Sudan itself, or with both?
That will be decided by Sudan, particularly by their leader al-Bashir. The United States offered Sudan a path to avoid direct conflict, basically saying to hand over bin Laden and allow our military to do what they need to do. This offer went without response, having expired a little over 4 hours ago, and so now the coalition has begun to move forward with their planned course of action. I put this question to military officials who have essentially told me that this is a war against Al-Qaeda, as long as Sudan lets it stay that way. Should there be any interference in that mission from the Sudanese side, then that mission may change very quickly, and coalition forces are prepared for that possibility.
So it's in question, then, exactly what the scope of this conflict will be.
There isn't much question about it among the commanders I've been talking to. They are ready for war with Sudan, and they are preparing for war with Sudan. If Sudan undertakes any belligerent action against this mission to fight terrorism, they should expect a response. That's basically what I've been hearing tonight.
So what would be the ideal outcome here?
The ideal outcome, according to officials, would be if these ongoing airstrikes are able to pressure the Sudanese government into cutting their ties with terrorist groups. War with Sudan is not the ideal outcome. Ideally, they want to put pressure on Sudan in order to secure their cooperation in this conflict. That's why we haven't seen any large-scale bombing raids yet against Sudan at large. We've seen missile strikes against terrorist positions and some airstrikes against Sudanese radar systems to prevent Sudan from tracking coalition movements and informing the enemy, but we've yet to see direct attacks against the Sudanese military itself.
We're at the very tip of the iceberg here, it sounds like. Has anyone said exactly how long they expect this sort of low-boil bombing campaign to last?
There is no word yet on how long this campaign will last, only that, like you said, this is only the start. Coming hours will see a dramatic escalation in activity, and military officials tell me you're not going to mistake it once it begins, and this is not the start of the main campaign. To repeat, that is from the military sources. They say we will not be able to mistake it once the main campaign begins, and that this is not it.
Carol, thanks for filling us in on those details. We are receiving some unconfirmed reports right now. This is coming from Sudanese state media, which claims that the Sudanese armed forces are presently engaged in a gun battle with what they refer to as enemy forces at the Nimule border crossing along the border with Uganda. This is an unconfirmed report from Sudan state media. They claim there's a gunfight ongoing at Nimule along the border with Uganda. It is unknown at this time which nation's forces Sudan may be exchanging fire with, or indeed if this confrontation is even occurring. If this is happening, I would guess it is likely a cross-border engagement, as we have not received any word yet of coalition ground forces having entered the country. Again, we have not heard of any ground movements into Sudan as of yet, while Sudan claims to be exchanging gunfire at a border crossing near Uganda. What is also not known are the circumstances of how or why this alleged gunfight started. No coalition ground forces have entered Sudan yet, and so that raises the question of whether Sudan may have fired the first shots in this incident. Carol, if Sudan did engage coalition forces first, is that the sort of thing that might escalate this war?
It's hard to say, David. In general, it's probably unlikely to have much of an effect. The coalition was kind of expecting things to happen. But what would be really concerning is if it turns out that they had official orders to fire. If the gunfire began in a situation that Sudan could claim was defensive, it might be a tough sell to justify war on Sudan in response. If it was an ordered assault, though, that would be something to be concerned about.
We also have some information to share in regards to the types of units we might see deployed tonight. This information was shared with us by top Pentagon officials, and we've been cleared to share it with you. Army officials have confirmed the imminent deployment at an unspecified time tonight of multiple mechanized infantry units with vehicles including fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and even the M1 Abrams main battle tank. Regular infantry units will follow the mechanized infantry, and they'll be moving with substantial air cover provided by the Air Force and the Navy. Air Force officials have told us about the types of aircraft active in tonight's bombing campaign. We will apparently see many sorties by fighter aircraft, including the F-14 Tomcat, the F-15 Eagle, and the F-16 Fighting Falcon. Multiple B-52 Stratofortress heavy bombers will be active tonight, as well as several F-117 Nighthawk stealth bombers. Military officials have declined to comment on how much firepower they are prepared to use in this campaign, but they have loosely quantified it as tens of thousands of pounds of explosive munitions. Now, Carol, I've been talking mostly to the Air Force and Army. What are Navy officials telling you?
The Navy has multiple active units in the Red Sea at the moment, most notably Carrier Strike Group 2, which is headed by the aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. Along the Eisenhower are 3 destroyers, the O'Bannon, the John Rogers, and the Karen, all of which are capable of firing the Tomahawk land attack missile. These Tomahawks are a type of cruise missile that can be launched from these destroyers at sea toward the land targets in Sudan, so even the Navy is participating in direct aerial attacks. Aircraft carriers, including the Eisenhower, are also launching fighter jets toward coastal Sudan. We'll go live now to one of these destroyers, the USS O'Bannon, where we have our own Justin Grissom on board. Justin, hi, can you hear me? What's been going on there on that ship?
Hi, Carol. Yes, I can hear you. The USS O'Bannon, like you said, is presently operating alongside the carrier Eisenhower in the Red Sea, not far off from the Sudanese coast. I'm afraid that's all I can say about our location. Just that we're in the Red Sea somewhere, and honestly, I couldn't tell you where if I wanted to. The crew of the O'Bannon has been non-stop reloading those Tomahawk missiles you mentioned, and they've been firing them off about as fast as they can get them loaded. These missiles are likely being used to strike at known al-Qaeda training camps and operating bases in the country, as well as Sudanese radars and communication stations. The purpose of the latter, we're told, is to keep Sudanese leadership in a state of uncertainty, as well as to prevent them from sharing our side's movements to the terrorists in the country. They're essentially using these missiles to defang the resistance from Sudan as they strike at the heart of al-Qaeda's operations there. There's another missile launching right now. Do you hear it? There it goes. Up and away.
We do hear that. What a sound. This is what war sounds like.
Speaking of what war sounds like, we are now receiving reports of anti-aircraft fire and warning sirens sounding in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. We'll cut now to our correspondent in Khartoum, Suzanne Ray. What's going on, Suzanne?
It sounds pretty wild here, David. The air raid sirens began about a minute ago, shortly followed by anti-aircraft weapons firing to the sky. I can see the rounds streaking through the sky in bright lines upward in almost every direction.
No, what are they shooting at? Do you hear aircraft?
I don't hear any aircraft at the moment, nor have I heard any explosions since the alarm began. It's possible they're responding to a false alarm, but I'm not quite sure.
Let's take a moment to listen in as this firing continues. Suzanne, just stay where you are a moment and let us hear this. Wow. Incredible sounds coming from Khartoum right now. Thank you, Suzanne, and stay safe.
David, if I may, we've received a report from the U.S. Marine Corps. An unfortunate report that 4 U.S. Marines and 6 British Royal Marines are among the first casualties of this conflict. The incident occurred around 15 minutes ago when an SA-330 helicopter operated by the British Royal Marines crashed in southern Egypt. There are no reports of enemy fire in the area, no evidence of enemy involvement in the crash. which the U.S. and British Marines say was likely due to a mechanical malfunction with their aircraft. The helicopter went down some ways south of Aswan, and all 10 persons aboard the helicopter have been confirmed dead. There were 4 U.S. Marines on board an aircraft with 6 British Marines. All 10 have been confirmed dead in what the coalition is calling an unfortunate accident.
Thanks for that update, Carol. We're also receiving some reports from Wadi Halfa, a city in Sudan along the border with Egypt, where Sudanese state media now claims that coalition ground forces have entered the country and are being met with resistance at the border crossing just north of Wadi Halfa. Gunfire was apparently heard just a few moments ago, and this is still a breaking story on Sudan state media, with no comment as of yet from coalition commanders. Carol, have you heard anything from the sources you've been in contact with that might lend veracity to this claim?
Nothing yet, David. Coalition leaders are being very tight-lipped about their present movements, obviously as one can guess for operational security reasons. I've not heard anything as of yet that indicates any truth to these Sudanese claims, but we'll definitely be keeping an eye on this situation as it develops. The coalition has denied, however, the earlier Sudanese reports of gunfire along their southern border, so it's hard to tell at this moment if there's any truth to these newer claims regarding gunfire in the north.
We have some word that the president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, has just broadcast a message to the Sudanese public via state media. We're getting the transcripts to us now, in which al-Bashir called the coalition rabid imperialist dogs, and that Sudan will protect itself against all foreign aggression, quote, using all means available. Al-Bashir went on to condemn the alleged border clashes which erupted near Uganda in the south and near Egypt in the north, calling them direct attacks on Sudan's sovereignty. President al-Bashir called U.S. President Bill Clinton a warmongering criminal and vowed to exact revenge for every bomb dropped and every bullet fired on Sudanese territory. Carol, it doesn't seem like the rhetoric from Sudan is going in the direction the coalition would have liked. Is that your summation as well?
It certainly doesn't sound that way, David. No. Not if the coalition was intending to pressure Sudan into cooperation. Instead, it seems to have had the opposite effect. Instead, strengthening the resolve of Sudan's dictator against what he sees as an illegal intervention in sovereign land. We'll take this discussion now to our military analyst, U.S. Army Colonel Craig Wilson. Colonel, what do you make of al-Bashir's comments tonight? Is it likely to be taken as declaration of war?
It highly depends on the action Sudan takes next, Carol. Words mean very little in times of war. Lots of statements are made by both sides to draw supporters and raise morale, and honestly something along these lines is expected when a leader is facing unwelcome military action in their country. What would be especially concerning is if there were to be any action behind these statements, and we'll have to keep a close eye on the situation as it develops to see if that's what happens.
Colonel Wilson, having operated in the region before and dealing with warlords and dictators, what would your best guess be as to al-Bashir's intent behind this message?
Well, I haven't exactly worked in this region before. I was more active in Somalia and the Horn of Africa, and there are a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences as well. All things considered, though, I think al-Bashir knows he's been backed into a corner, and that resisting the coalition at this stage isn't likely to be a winning strategy. I don't think there's much to be concerned about here. I think he's just telling the Sudanese public what they want to hear. You see, leaders always have to balance talking to two audiences, and it's up to the rest of us to figure out which audience a particular message is meant for. There's domestic, and then there's foreign. I think this was more of a domestic-oriented message and not necessarily one meant for international audiences like the coalition. I think this is just more saber-rattling, like we always see from dictators.
What's your take on the coalition's denial of Sudanese claims regarding a gunfight near the border with Uganda? We heard earlier that Sudan was claiming to be engaging enemy forces near Namule Crossing, but we just heard a few minutes ago that the coalition denies exchanging fire with Sudanese soldiers.
It's really hard to say what's going on there, Carol. The Sudanese are firing tracers into the sky at the clouds right now. They're clearly on some kind of hair trigger alert status, and so they might have been firing at anything. Who knows? I suppose it's possible that maybe a gunfight occurred, but whether or not it was with these coalition troops or not is what's in question. If coalition troops did exchange fire over the border with the Sudanese, then there's probably a very good reason why they're not being upfront about that just yet. This is what we call the fog of war, Carol, and it's likely the coalition is using the fog of war as a psychological weapon in and of itself, sowing doubt and uncertainty in the minds of the Sudanese commanders.
Sorry, Colonel, but I'd like to go now to Aswan Coalition Air Base in southern Egypt, where our correspondent Elliot Schwartz is calling us from. Hi, Elliot. What's going on there?
David, there are air raid sirens blaring in Aswan right now. We don't know what's going on for sure exactly, but one lieutenant I was with a minute ago told me he heard his commander mentioning something about a Scud missile launch. Now, I may not know a whole lot about military hardware, but Scud is one name I recognize from my days covering the Gulf War. It's a Soviet-made tactical ballistic missile that typically only state actors operate. There's a very real possibility, I think, that we could be under attack from Sudan directly right now.
Colonel Wilson, does that assessment line up with your knowledge and experience?
I think it does, in most cases, yes. Sudan is known to operate Scud missiles gifted to them by the former Soviet Union, much like Iraq. The silver lining about Scud missiles is that a lone Scud isn't the most accurate weapon one could use. The downside for the defenders, though, obviously, is that if the attackers launch enough of them, some are bound to hit close enough to cause some serious damage and casualties. In the Gulf War, nearly 20% of American casualties came from Scud missiles, so they're not exactly something to be on the receiving end of, regardless of their accuracy.
Elliot, stay safe for me, but tell me if you can hear anything incoming.
No, I don't hear anything yet, David. It would probably be at least a few minutes before they reach us, I would assume. I do hear a second alarm, though, and I think it's telling us to get shelter, so that's what I'm headed to do right now.
Please do that, yes. Get somewhere safe. Elliot Schwartz is in Egypt, at what the coalition has nicknamed Aswan Coalition Air Base, where commanders say a Scud missile launch has been detected from Sudan. We don't know how many missiles are involved in this attack, nor do we know for sure the source of the attack, although Elliot and Colonel Wilson have speculated that it may well be from the Sudanese armed forces themselves.
Revisiting a story from earlier, Commandant General of the British Royal Marines has responded to the news of a helicopter crash involving 6 Royal Marines and 4 American Marines. General Maxim Dawson stated that the helicopter, a French-made SA-330, was flying through heavy winds and a sandstorm when it crashed, and that there was no indication of enemy fire involved. The crash is being called an accident, which General Dawson refers to as an unfortunate loss. Dawson also says that he will personally inform the families of the deceased British Marines of the incident. In other developments, another round of airstrikes was reported to have struck the outskirts of Khartoum just a little bit ago. The Associated Press says that there are multiple structure fires in and around Khartoum, and fire crews are responding. It is unknown at this time what sites are affected by these fires, only that they appear to be in the outskirts of the nation's capital city. Khartoum is a city of over 3 million people, all of whom have been directed to shelter wherever they can find safety tonight as the coalition continues conducting air and missile attacks.
International reactions to the outbreak of war have been varied, with President Boris Yeltsin of Russia calling the war an unfortunately necessary evil against the scourge of terrorism, while encouraging the United States-led coalition to exercise restraint and caution as its forces move forward with their objectives. Yeltsin said he is monitoring the situation, but Russia has no present plans of involvement on either side. Russia strongly condemned the January 20th attacks on the United States and the January 15th bombing in Manila, which killed Pope John Paul II. Yeltsin's remarks tonight are in line with the recent Russian position that terrorism must be dealt with, but that it must be dealt with carefully. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, anti-war protests in the capital Islamabad have turned violent tonight. Protesters against the war in Sudan gathered at the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad earlier tonight, and recent reports indicate brawling in the streets and the deployment of tear gas in response. Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, blames the Pakistani Taliban for instigating the violence, and vows she will do the utmost to protect Pakistanis of all kinds.
CNN is now reporting, and they have multiple reporters on the ground throughout Sudan, whereas we only have one in Khartoum. CNN is reporting that large explosions are taking place not just in Khartoum, but also in the northern city of Wadi Halfa and the southern city of Juba at this moment. The coastal city of Port Sudan, meanwhile, has reporters on the ground saying that the helicopters have flown in from the direction of the Red Sea. It is unclear if these helicopters landed at Port Sudan or if they continued on to another objective, but CNN reporters in Port Sudan have spotted helicopters flying over the city. David, do you think we may now be seeing the start of the major campaign?
Well, I'm not seeing what CNN is seeing right now, obviously, but from the sound of these reports, it does sound like there has been a step up in the military activity that we're seeing tonight. Let's ask our correspondent in Khartoum, Suzanne Ray. Suzanne, are you there? What's going on in the capital right now?
It's chaotic here, David. All around us there are bright flashes of light and bright orange fireballs rising up from the ground, lighting up the night sky. The air is filled with lingering smoke, which is glowing in red-orange color as these fires continue. You can hear it all in the background with me. Here, I'm going to step out onto the hotel's balcony so you can get a better listen.
Incredible and shocking. Khartoum is a city of more than 3 million people, and that is frankly, that is an unfathomable number of people to all be experiencing this. I cannot imagine what those 3 million people must be feeling right now as this chaos erupts around them. Carol, what do you make of what's going on?
It's incredible, David, the amount of explosive power that is being unleashed right now. Suzanne, please keep your mic open for a minute so we can hear the sounds in the background. We're going to bring in Colonel Craig Wilson again. Colonel, what stands out to you as we hear these sounds from Khartoum?
Well, that's certainly a massive bombing campaign, which has been unleashed just now in Sudan, Carol. We'll wait for an official word from military officials, but I would suspect that this is what the coalition was meaning when they said, we're not going to mistake it when the main campaign begins. It's certainly an unmistakable escalation in events here tonight, and I think we're going to get word soon that the operations are fully underway. I'll be very surprised if we don't hear from the Pentagon in the coming minutes.
Colonel, do you think it's likely that ground operations have begun in Sudan?
I'm not going to comment on any potential military movements at this time. We'll have to wait until military leaders confirm that.
Colonel Craig Wilson, thank you for joining us. Stand by in case we have further questions. Suzanne Ray, thank you for your coverage there in Khartoum. Stay in contact, but get somewhere safe, please. Carol, what else are we hearing?
Sudanese media is right on top of the events as they unfold, where they are currently showing photos of injured civilians in the streets of Khartoum, calling the photos proof, and this is a quote from Sudan's media, proof that the people are the real targets. Meanwhile, here in the United States, sources familiar with the White House are saying that President Clinton has called his cabinet and key members of Congress to a meeting at the West Wing of the White House to brief them on how the operation is unfolding. We don't expect to hear the contents of that discussion tonight, but we will be keeping an ear out in case anyone comments on that meeting.
We have some developments coming to us now. This is from Aswan Air Base in Egypt, where American coalition commanders are confirming that a wave of Scud missiles struck the airbase and the surrounding areas just about 2 minutes ago. As you know, if you've been tuned in, we have our own correspondent at Aswan, Elliot Schwartz. And we do hope he is okay, of course, along with all of the servicemen and women who are present there. There is no word on casualties as of yet. Personnel are still scrambling to assess the damage, but it has been confirmed that somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 Scud missiles were fired from Sudanese territory into Egypt, where they struck in and around the Aswan International Airport, which is presently being utilized as a staging area by the coalition. We are working to establish contact with our correspondent Elliot Schwartz, who is on the ground there at the airbase. However, we have not been able to make contact with Elliot at this time. We will keep trying to reach Elliot until either he responds or we hear about casualties, whichever comes first.
David, Carol, may I interject some information which has just been confirmed to me? All right. I've just received word from some associates of mine at the Pentagon, and they're aware that I'm on the air right now, and they've given me the green light to report this for you. That coalition ground forces are indeed operating inside the Republic of Sudan at this moment. Coalition ground forces are present in country and on the move towards their first combat objectives. I was just saying a bit ago that I'd be surprised if we didn't hear something soon, and there it is. Confirmation from the Pentagon that ground forces are present in Sudan and moving towards objectives. This perhaps sheds some light on earlier reports of gunfire near border towns, and if those indeed occurred, then it's likely they may have been part of the initial coalition push into Sudan.
Thanks, Colonel Wilson, for that major update. Ground forces are moving in Sudan, and we're expecting details on that any moment now. We'll keep you updated on this as it develops, but it does seem the ground war in Sudan has begun, under cover of a massive nighttime bombardment. Tonight is the full moon night, which presumably provides some extra light to ground forces as they move around. Likely a strategic decision on part of the coalition. Is that right, Colonel?
Oh, almost definitely. The full moon night was chosen for that reason. Almost everything about this invasion is played out by the book. You've got the air war to soften targets on the ground, followed by a ground invasion to swiftly capture key objectives, and all this occurring while the night's light is at its greatest. This is an extremely by-the-book operation plan the coalition is following, and it has all the hallmarks of a carefully decided course of action that was deliberately plotted in this way to maximize its effectiveness.
Hold that thought, please, Colonel. The news agency Reuters is reporting that emergency medical services were called to the Sudanese Republican Palace, which was reportedly struck in the latest wave of coalition air attacks on the Sudanese capital. The mission does appear to have shifted towards one of regime change in Sudan following the belligerency of President Omar al-Bashir and the lead-up to this conflict, as well as while we've been on the air tonight. The coalition was prepared to take this road, and now it appears that this turn has been taken in this conflict. In case you missed anything, we have not been able to independently verify this report, but according to Reuters, emergency medical services were called to the Republican Palace in Sudan, the residence of President al-Bashir, which was apparently damaged in the latest air raid on Khartoum. Sudanese state media has not yet reported on this development, and the condition of President al-Bashir remains unknown at this time. David, what else do we have?
We also have a recording from earlier that we've just now been given the okay to broadcast. This is from our correspondent Jamie Nelson, from about 30 minutes ago apparently, and Jamie is embedded with the U.S. Army 3rd Infantry Division. Ground operations are underway in Sudan now. That much has been confirmed to us by our military analyst Colonel Wilson. And so the 3rd ID is likely on the move right now, and we can only guess as to where Jamie might be along with them. Here is that recording, 30 minutes ago, from Jamie Nelson, in bed with the 3rd Infantry Division.
We're on the move now. We left Aswan Air Base around 2 hours ago. I'm with the US Army 3rd Infantry Division, and they're moving now down Highway 75 southbound toward the border with Sudan. We're going to be reaching the border in about 10 minutes. The Humvee trucks are gassed, machine guns are loaded, rifles are freshly greased and ready to go. Everyone's got their helmets and armour on. I've got my helmet and flak jacket on as well. And I guess that's what's going on now. We'll be entering Sudan any minute now. The border is just ahead. This is Jamie Nelson with World News Tonight, Radio 660, reporting from Egypt as coalition forces move towards Sudan. Signing off.
So that was Jamie Nelson, who was in southern Egypt at the time of that recording, on the way to Sudan with the Army's 3rd Infantry Division. We can only hazard a guess as to where Jamie might be at this moment, presumably somewhere in or nearby to northern Sudan. We still don't have any word on our correspondent back in Aswan, Elliot Schwartz, but we are receiving some preliminary casualty figures from that rocket attack which took place there a few minutes ago. Coalition forces are estimating the injured at over 100 tonight, with fatalities confirmed but not yet accounted. Our concern for our colleague Elliot grows more with this news. However, we are still holding out hope that he is safe there and will contact us soon. Carol?
We certainly do hope Elliot is all right and that he lets us know his status soon. In domestic news, the FBI had raised the terror threat level to orange or high yesterday afternoon as scattered airstrikes against targets in Sudan first began. The FBI has been concerned about the possibility of extremist blowback within the United States in response to the coalition entry into Sudan. Tonight, the FBI has announced it has issued an arrest warrant for a suspect who remains at large. 25-year-old Anwar al-Shahan, a Pakistani citizen of Yemeni birth, is a known associate of al-Qaeda, and intelligence suggests he trained with al-Qaeda in Sudan prior to the January attacks. Anwar al-Shahan is suspected to have crossed into the United States via Mexico and may be somewhere in the Phoenix area, the FBI tells us. Al-Shahan is believed to be involved in a plot the FBI became aware of last week in which 4 men were to set off chemical weapons in American cities in response to the military campaign in Sudan. 2 men have already been arrested in connection with this plot in Pakistan, with a third believed to have escaped to neighboring Afghanistan, while Anwar al-Shahan is believed to be in the United States and presently at large. The FBI, Arizona Highway Patrol, and Phoenix area police agencies are conducting a manhunt for al-Shahan at the moment, and authorities are asking for any and all information which may be useful.
Now, Carol, I have some good news. We're getting a call right now from Elliot. Elliot, hi. Can you hear me? How are you doing? Are you safe? Tell us if you're all right.
Yeah, hey David, I'm here. Yeah, I'm alright, just a bit. I made it to the shelter in time, but you gotta keep in mind that this isn't an actual military base. It's being used like one, but this is a civilian airport we're in, so it doesn't have things like proper bomb shelters. I just sort of went to an underground parking level, and the shaking from the bombs knocked a light fixture down, cracked a glass bulb over my head. I was bleeding a bit, but I've been checked out by a medic here, and they've been great in responding to this attack. And they've removed the glass and bandaged me up. There's no sign of concussion, so yeah, I think I'm alright.
We're definitely grateful to hear that. We were getting concerned about you. We do understand that there have been casualties. What can you tell us about that?
At least 2 of the rockets launched toward our position here struck directly at the personal barracks where the soldiers and airmen were resting in preparation for tomorrow's operations. It's estimated that there are at least 80 injured in the barracks alone, with a further 20 or so injured by other rockets that hit elsewhere in the base area. There are some personnel killed in action tonight, I'm sorry to report, and I did see one of them being attended to on the tarmac when I emerged from the shelter. There are numerous aircraft and ground vehicles either damaged or destroyed, and at least 1 reserve fuel tank is ruptured. There's a large fire ongoing. The coalition is advising all media people to relocate to a hotel just outside the airport grounds for our safety. I think that's where I'll be spending the night tonight. I'm going to get some rest and recover, and I'll return to the base tomorrow morning to report from location again.
Sounds good, Elliot. Take care of yourself and stay safe. Give some ointment on that wound if you can. That's Elliot Schwartz, reporting live from Aswan Coalition Air Base in Egypt. And he is alive and doing all right after a frightening missile attack was launched from Sudan earlier tonight. Elliot, thanks for joining us, and good night.
This is likely delayed information given what we've been seeing now tonight, but Pentagon officials have now confirmed that the major campaign has begun, the air war is in full swing, and the coalition is employing a strategy known as rapid dominance in Sudan tonight. Rapid dominance essentially entails paralyzing an enemy with overwhelming firepower to create panic and confusion among the enemy leadership so that the campaign achieves about as much psychological impact as it does physical. This is a heavily strategized war plan that we're seeing put to the test tonight, No doubt the result of months or even years of thinking and planning for a contingency like this one. It is a worthy note, however, that while this is a major and widespread bombing campaign, this is not like World War II style carpet bombing, and this isn't a blitzkrieg. Rapid dominance has some in common with blitzkrieg, but the way it's executed is supposed to be much more precise. Back in the Second World War, they were using gravity bombs, dumb bombs, if you will, and hitting the wide areas with them. Tonight, we're seeing the use of much more advanced weaponry, and these are smart bombs. They're all satellite guided, and they're being used to hit a very particular and precise targets within Sudan.
Thanks for that breakdown, Colonel Wilson. I also wanted to ask you about this new report we've just received. The airport in the coastal city of Port Sudan in the northeast of the country, along the Red Sea, has allegedly been captured. This according to a coalition announcement which came through just now. The 25-minute operation apparently consisted of U.S. Navy SEALs, coordinated with British SAS and Polish GROM Special Forces. It would seem that this was a joint Special Forces operation between three nations who apparently worked together very effectively and managed to capture the airfield in less than a half hour. Colonel Wilson, is this an unusual operation, either in its speed or its coordination?
It certainly isn't out of the ordinary to see nations aligned in conflict working together, but what does strike me is just how effectively they managed to do so. 25 minutes to capture even a civilian airport, one where some sort of enemy resistance is to be expected, that is impressively quick. Then again, we are talking about what are likely some of the best special forces operators in the world there, and so it really all comes down to what the Sudanese side had to defend with. If resistance was lighter than expected, it's certainly possible to accomplish a localized objective like this in a fairly short time frame. I would be curious to learn more about how victory was achieved, whether enemy presence was entirely neutralized, or if perhaps the airport was surrendered to the invading forces. We may not know that for some time, but the short time frame indicates to me something more than just good coordination. If the defending frontline troops are already surrendering this early on, it could spell disaster for President al-Bashir and his forces.
A major development has come to us from sources familiar with the intelligence community. Apparently, the United States possesses credible evidence at this hour that Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir may have in fact been killed in tonight's airstrike on the Republican Palace in Khartoum. This allegation is unconfirmed, with no statements from the Sudanese side as to their president's condition ever since that airstrike earlier tonight. It was just after the palace was struck that Reuters reported emergency medical services having been called to the presidential residence. It was speculated at that time that al-Bashir was likely injured, and we are still assuming that to be the case. However, some familiar with those in the intelligence community are saying that there is talk of credible evidence relating to the alleged death of Omar al-Bashir. Colonel Wilson, what are likely to be the effects of this development?
Well, it's certainly shocking to me, as it will be to the whole world, I'm guessing, but it isn't particularly surprising. The Clinton administration denied in the weeks leading up to this conflict that the goal was regime change in Sudan. He insisted it was a fight against terrorists in the country, but I think we all knew going into this that taking out al-Bashir was going to be a very likely outcome. However, that was to be accomplished. Now, of course, it's possible that the intelligence is wrong. We were talking about fog of war earlier, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is true, given what was said about credible evidence.
What are the possible ramifications in international law if this news were confirmed? What's the legality behind using military force to kill another nation's leader?
It's a gray area that highly depends on when the killing is done. Assassination is illegal under the Geneva Conventions. We can't just randomly fire a missile or drop a bomb on somebody who just opposes us, just because we feel like it. In times of war, however, the situation changes. In warfare, an enemy head of state is a legitimate military target, and they are fair game at that point. We are engaged in a war with Sudan and against the terrorists they support who attacked our nation, and so I'm fairly certain international law is on our side with this one. The question that remains, however, is how the global public will respond to such a thing. I imagine it to be very controversial in many places, but we'll just have to wait and see how that shakes out if this report is indeed truthful.
Disturbing reports from the Syrian capital Damascus is having come in at virtually the same time as that last report. A crowd of more than 3,000 anti-war protesters gathered outside the U.S. Embassy chanted, "America is a great Satan," and clashed with Syrian police and stormed the gates to the American Embassy. It is reported that 6 embassy staff have been killed, including an aide to Ambassador Chris Ross, and upwards of a dozen other injured inside the embassy compound. Syrian police halted the attack using live ammunition, killing another 20 or more. The U.S. Embassy in Damascus says that Ambassador Chris Ross was not in the compound when it was stormed, and he has been accounted for. The U.S. State Department calls the embassy raid a grave and despicable act of terror. Blame for the attack is being pinned on the Lebanese organization Hezbollah, which the State Department says threatened U.S. embassies in the Middle East last week, and which the Syrian state has close ties with.
That is certainly an update to keep an eye on there in Syria as we continue to monitor the world's reaction to Operation Nile Garden. We'd like to take you back to our correspondent Jamie Nelson for a moment, who is talking to us live from wherever the U.S. Army 3rd Infantry is. Jamie, hi. It's been a while since you're recording. What's going on there? Do you know where you are?
Carol, we're in the midst of a contentious battle right now, and I wanted you to hear this. The 3rd Infantry has moved across the Sudanese border, and they're encountering what I would call moderate resistance as we move forward. There have been more than a few Sudanese soldiers who have surrendered to the guys here, and there do seem to be more who surrender as we move further. But I wouldn't call this light resistance, it's just a tad heavier than that. Sudanese forces are maintaining a steady return of fire, even despite the numerous surrenders we've seen.
Wow, you definitely hear that in the background there. So surreal to hear it so up close and personal. Tell us, what kinds of forces are putting up the most resistance?
It's been mostly local police putting up the bulk of the resistance as we move inward toward the nearest city. I will not specify for security reasons. We've seen some Sudanese regular army, but not very many so far. And the ones that we have encountered don't appear to have much better weapons than the cops. The Sudanese are putting up a hard fight for what they appear to be outfitted with, but it's very clear that they are outmatched tonight.
Where are you reporting from? Like, are you in a house or something? We do hope you're somewhere safe. It sounds like a lot of bullets are being fired around you.
I'm reporting to you from the back of what's called a Bradley fighting vehicle. It's a type of armoured truck the army uses. It has machine guns all over it and lots of thick armour all around. That's where I am right now.
It sounds like it's about the best place for you right now. Jamie, what has been the most surprising thing you've seen since crossing the border?
I think just the speed of it all. We've hardly stopped since we left Aswan. This snag of resistance ahead of us now is what slowed us down the most, and still we're inching along at a slow but steady pace. Once we get through here, we'll probably be at the next town in no time, and there's an objective there the guys weren't planning to get to until at least sunrise. Things are moving along at lightning pace. That's what surprised me the most.
Jamie Nelson, everybody. Definitely one of our toughest reporters. Jamie, thank you for your reporting tonight, and we look forward to hearing from you tomorrow morning.
When asked if the rumored death of the Sudanese president might lead to a pause in the war, the Pentagon stated firmly that there will be no cessation of hostilities until there is a formal declaration of surrender from whoever happens to be in charge right now. However, with the intelligence analysts saying that the Sudanese government is now in a state of disarray among an unprecedented bombing campaign, it remains unclear how likely such a declaration may be, how soon it may come, or if it is even possible at all presently for the Sudanese government to meet that demand. The Pentagon has reiterated, though, that, quote, the bombs won't stop, the tanks won't stop, the boots won't stop until every last Sudanese soldier lays down their weapons. We're going to bring you back to the home front now, where we have our own Brian Stewart in Washington, D.C., near the White House. Brian has told us that crowds have gathered in front of the White House tonight following the announcement of the airstrike, which may, repeat, may, have killed Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir. Brian, what are they doing there?
They're celebrating, Carol. They gathered here shortly after news broke that intel agencies think al-Bashir might be dead. Again, like you said, that's an unconfirmed rumor at this time. But the crowds gathered in response to that, and now they're celebrating, presumably, that airstrike. They're chanting, USA, USA, and they're shouting and whooping like it's a party. Oh, now they're singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Honestly, I'm not really sure how to feel about this.
Let's take a moment to listen.